My name is Teresa Hoy. My nephew, Christopher James Hoy, went missing May the 19th, 2022 in Dixon, Missouri, and he's still missing. He was born in Peoria, and he grew up there. I think everybody should know Chris. When he was growing up, he was very energetic. When he gets excited about something, you get excited about it. Always kind of laughing. He liked to make people happy. He was a pitcher in the baseball team. He was pretty good. He also had his own paper route. And once he was on his own, he was working at Caterpillar. But any job that controlled him, he really didn't care for after a while. So then he turned around and he wanted to better himself further. He started buying houses and then doing what he loved was fixing them up, working with his hands. He had met a lady, he was crazy about her, and they had 2 children, but then all of a sudden something happened, and I'm not real privy to it. She was nowhere to be found. He went gung-ho and got custody of his 2 kids and started a life, and a fatherhood will change you. And then he met Alicia.
I'm Alicia Hoy. I am Chris's wife. I met Chris at a bar. November 3rd of 2017. I was meeting a friend of mine there, and we were gonna play pool. And Chris is sitting at the bar, and he kind of scoots over, just asking me how my day was, you know, what do I do and all that. And we just sit and talk, and we talk a lot. Just about everything under the sun. I might have fallen in love with him that night, you know? His kids lived with him, so I met them pretty early on. He seems like this very sweet, caring father, you know? But he didn't meet my daughter, Zoe, until 4 months later.
We got all you need. Colors, powers, sound effects.
Like the first night we had went over to his house, we sat in the kids' playroom hitting each other with lightsabers. And there were little sticky hands. Like we were throwing them at each other, and then he made fun of me because I got stuck one on the ceiling.
Oh my God.
And Mom was like recording all of it. She had this video and she was just laughing like I've never heard her laugh before.
Dear Lord.
So I had always like prayed for siblings. Like I always wanted a little brother, a little sister, and then I got both. It was really exciting. Like the kids were so cute. It seemed like they were just immediately my siblings. I loved them. And I didn't really know how to feel about having a dad, but I was also super excited about it. And he was just super open. Like he would try to help me whenever possible. It means a lot because I never thought I would have a dad, and he just jumped in.
It was April of 2019 is when we found out we were pregnant. And we had already at that point set a date for the wedding.
Recording? Yeah. We're gathered here today to celebrate one of life's greatest moments.
And we just had a small backyard ceremony with just the kids. And my cousin officiated.
With this ring, I thee wed.
But I couldn't ask for anything more than that. Chris was very excited. He's just hoping for another boy, and he did not get that. But he loves all his kids, and he was ecstatic to have another one join the family. But when I met Chris, he had some rental properties in Peoria, and then he had Airbnbs. So we decided we would grow the rental properties. You know, passive income is a great thing. The Airbnb business was booming then, so we were making decent money until COVID hit.
New York, California, Illinois, and Connecticut, all ordering non-essential employees to stay home. Those orders cover 75 million people across the United States.
And then it all kind of fell apart. We lost 10 grand a month. So we made that hard decision together. And we decided, we were gonna cut our losses. We took what we had and we moved here to Missouri. We wanted to homestead with the gardening, the animals. I always had baby goats in mind, and so did he. It just seemed like the next chapter in our story.
My name's Andrew Sheely. I'm a news reporter with Phelps County Focus in Rolla, Missouri. Since the COVID-19 pandemic, we've had this wave of folks moving into the Ozarks who are trying to live this homestead lifestyle. And Chris was part of this migration that's going on right now.
They wanted to be able to grow their own food, have their own animals. I did think it was cool, and they were doing something together that they both love doing, and they just had more big plans for the future. I did stay up in Illinois because I had gotten accepted into nursing school. But by the time I had come down for the first time, they had gotten pretty much everything they needed set up. Like, they had pens for the animals. The house was looking a lot better than the pictures. The kids were super excited to show me their rooms and what they were doing, their toys. Like, I had never seen them so proud of what they had made down here. But I noticed something was off about Chris, and I didn't know what it was. And I asked him if he was okay, and he's like, I'm going through it. And he just seemed a little different.
My name is Blake Potter, and Chris is my fiance's stepdad. Obviously, the family was happy, the kids were happy.
Yes. I like milking the goat.
But moving to Missouri with all that because of COVID, that puts a stress on everybody, especially with the money loss.
The first couple months we were there, all we did was we settled in. And then I got a job as an ABA therapist part-time. Chris, he's like, I want to homeschool the kids. Like, we were building our dreams. May 19th, 2022. We wake up at 6, we go have our coffee. We do our chores. I take off to work, come home, and there's a severe thunderstorm warning. Our property has a habit of flooding, and we go to the back and we work on preventing from flooding. We're outside and we're soaking wet because of the rain. And he's like, all right, I'm gonna go take a shower. I said, okay, babe. And I go in and I check on the kids, kind of clean up. And I'm standing at the counter when he comes out. And I'm like, hey, baby, I'm gonna go milk the goats. And he goes, okay, baby. And so I go through the basement to the garage, down to the basement. And I hear a truck start up and leave. And so I run up to the front. And Chris's truck isn't there. And the gate's open. And so I run inside. Where'd your dad go? My son. He said, I don't know. He told me to go to my room. I'm like, that's all he said? He's like, yeah. And he goes, where'd he go? I said, I don't know, bud. And I go out to the porch and I'm kind of mad, because Chris never leaves. He never leaves the house without giving me a kiss, telling me he loves me. Or giving the kids a kiss, telling them that he loves them. It's routine with him. And I sit on the porch and I call Zoe and I'm like, Chris just left. And he left the gate open. He goes, okay, what'd he take? And I look down at the porch table and his wallet's there and his phone's there. And I'm like, well, he didn't take his wallet or his phone. And I just have this nagging feeling that I need to find him. Because this isn't right. Something's not right. So I call a friend of mine over to watch the kids. And I tell her, I'm like, I gotta go check the river. And it was just like instinct. It was a gut feeling. So if he just needs to get away, I feel like he would go and sit at the river, commune with nature, because that's what he likes to do, So I think that's why I'm thinking, look there, I gotta find my husband. And so I go to the river, it's not even a mile from my house. And I see his truck, so I pull off. I smell honeysuckle, and it's his favorite flower. I walk across the road, and I look in the truck. It's not locked, the key's in the ignition. There's nothing in there. He's not there. And I look around, there's no footprints. So the river where he parked his truck is actually where we go when we take the kids swimming. I mean, it can get kind of deep.
Given where Chris's truck is found by the Highway 28 bridge by the Gasconade, it looks immediately like an emergency because the Gasconade River is actually one of the deadlier rivers in this area. And the reason why is it's deeper, there's a strong current, and many people have drowned in that. His truck is parked, he's nowhere to be found. Now, given that the river's right there, you have to logically conclude he may have gotten swept up in the river. And the fact that it's swelled up because of a rainstorm makes it all the more dangerous.
So at that moment, every worst case scenario is running through my mind. And I don't know what to think. I don't know what to feel. I don't know what to do. Just everything starts running through my head of what could have possibly happened.
He could be floating downriver, he could be clinging to a log, he could be moments away from drowning. Given the circumstances of Chris's disappearance, time is of the essence, and so the Pulaski County Sheriff's Office responds in full force. But unfortunately at that point, it's so dark, the woods are so dense, there's just not a lot you're going to be able to do if you're searching for a person.
So the next morning, by 9 o'clock, the detective comes over and he talks to me. And he goes, okay, I've got a search team. And I was grateful.
I mean, they put together a team of 50 officers because they know if he is in that river, he might be moments from death. The sooner that they can find him, the more likely it is that he's going to be able to survive.
It was approaching 5 o'clock, so I decided I was going to go ahead and call the detective. He's like, we just got back. So they were there 6 hours or so. And he goes, we searched everywhere we could. We took drones out. They searched 3 miles downstream, 3 or 4 miles upstream, just in case. And he said, we didn't find any signs, we didn't find him.
The river is the initial focus. There's an intensive search made of the river. For 5 miles going down the river, they drag it, they search it, they look for clothing, nothing is found. And 5 miles is key in this case because the Gasconade River is particularly windy. And I mean, it's unlikely that the body is going to float downriver past all of those curves, all of those twists. It would get hung up in branches, it would get stuck in a whirlpool, something. They don't find any clues. Now, if there's no clothing found, if there's no footprints, they're at a dead end.
Doesn't make sense why he would leave. Like, why? When Chris gets down, he usually just bounces right back. The events of the last few years did weigh on him quite a bit. But before he disappeared, he wasn't quite as vibrant of a person. You know, the rental businesses were a flop with COVID. And he would tell me, you know, he was sad that he didn't have this empire, you know, that he was trying to create and to leave for his kids.
Chris pretty much had no business anymore. Like, COVID just shut everything down. Like, I know income dropped a lot and bills were just piling up because they didn't have a whole lot to help pay anymore. I just know after COVID really hit, everything just kind of went to hell.
All the houses were all in foreclosure then. And I know it had hurt him bad. He was a proud guy, a proud man. I'm sure he felt ashamed. There's a lot to homesteading. A lot of people think they can just jump right into it, and you can't. It is a lot of work, a lot of money. They homeschooled their kids. So that, on top of everything else, that's a lot of pressure.
Right before he left, he was consistently depressed. It didn't seem, from what Mom said, that he bounced back up, or even from the last time I saw him, he had just been depressed.
The week before he disappeared, he did tell me that he didn't want to do this anymore. I'm like, do what? I'm like, babe, if there is anything I can do, I'll do it, whatever you need. And he couldn't pinpoint anything. Communication wasn't all that strong, but I felt like there was stuff on his mind. There was something big in his head, and he wasn't sharing in that week. Whether it was, some outside force or just something, his own thoughts, I could never. And to this day, I can't pinpoint what was going on. I didn't know what to do. I felt like things had changed. Something had changed.
Chris was probably doubting himself for months leading up to his disappearance. He probably had this anxiety building up in himself, this fear, this dread that he was a failure, that he was dragging his family down. And that developed malignantly within himself. He started to doubt whether or not they were going to be able to make it in the Ozarks. And it developed into this overwhelming fear. And what his family was seeing as this sudden break had actually been building up over time for months as Chris started to doubt whether or not the homestead was going to be successful. I think that suicide is something we have to seriously consider in this case.
One of the biggest things I did think at first was suicide, because he left his phone, left his wallet, took his truck down to the river. I don't think that so much anymore, because when he had first met me, I self-harmed a lot. And one of his biggest things that always stuck to me was, do you want me to have to explain to your siblings why they don't have a big sister anymore? And that was always such a big deal to me. I don't think he would ever commit suicide, because he would always fight through whatever was going on.
He wanted to clean out the basement. He wanted to become a notary. He had all these wants, and he had plans. You're not going to make those plans if you're not going to try to follow through. At least my husband never made plans without following through. He was very deliberate in his actions.
I don't think he was suicidal. Depressed, most definitely. But suicidal, no. No, I don't think that one bit.
So the night I found his truck at the river, my thought was not that he went to commit suicide. And to this day, it's not. It's not my thought. I don't know what happened, but I don't believe it was suicide. The police did search 10 days after. Had conservation out there, highway patrol, people in boats,
A K-9 unit is deployed in this case to try to find a scent trail of Chris, and it does hit on one. In fact, it leads away from the truck and towards the highway. But the scent trail that the dog picks up suddenly stops.
When you have the K-9 unit come out and they get a scent that leads up to the road, and then it just disappears, that only, in my mind, makes me think that he got picked up. He doesn't just disappear out of thin air.
We don't know who would have picked him up. Who, if he was picked up, who would have picked him up? And why has no one said anything?
The Pulaski County Sheriff's Office does a thorough search of the vehicle, and there's no evidence of foul play. There's no blood, there's no signs of violence or struggle. The only clue that's recovered is a cigarette butt.
And it wasn't a brand that Chris smokes, wasn't a brand that I smoked. So I thought it was odd. Something was amiss.
This cigarette butt is one of the only clues in this case, and it could be significant. Could this be the key to solving this crime? The cigarette butt being found in Chris's truck opens up the possibility that someone else is involved in this case. Who could that be? Was there somebody that wanted to do him harm?
The fact that his scent was tracked to the road. It tells me that he was picked up. I think there's a likelihood of Chris being forced out of the house, of being lured away, if you will, to protect his family.
What we know is the scent trail that the dog picks up leads to the highway and then it suddenly stops. Now we've got to consider two possibilities there. Now it could be that Chris voluntarily got in a vehicle, or maybe Chris was forcibly put in a vehicle, thrown in the bed of a truck, driven off. The way Chris left his house the day he disappeared is a big red flag. He leaves behind his wallet, he leaves behind his cell phone, he leaves his kids behind, he doesn't say where he's going, and he leaves his gate open. Given the way Chris left, homicide is something you've got to consider.
Apparently our area, it's a place where meth heads frequent. And 6 months before he disappeared, woken up at 4 a.m. and the dogs were barking. Chris goes to the front door and he sees someone leaving our property, walking out of our drive. Down the road, gets into a red car. I don't know if they saw that we were building stuff, so maybe, we either had the money or we had materials they could use or, what have you. I don't know. So my husband, he follows them and, has a confrontation, basically says, told them to stay off our land. It's ours. Like, you don't need to be on it. There's no reason for it. We have livestock, we have animals, we have kids.
The Ozarks is very beautiful, but unfortunately it has a massive drug problem. We had a meth boom starting in the 90s that has not let up. And then within the last 10 years, the opioid crisis has really taken over. And that's really been a 1-2 punch for this region. When Chris and Alicia moved to the Ozarks, they encountered this kind of pecking order that exists in the countryside. We have a lot of drug addicts, we have a lot of crime that is associated with that. And whenever somebody moves here, they start looking for, vulnerabilities. Is this somebody I can rob? Is this somebody I can burglarize? And indeed, they do encounter some of that. They have to deal with somebody on their property who they don't know. What are they doing there? Very likely, that was somebody trying to get a sense of how protective they were. Are they armed? Is this somebody that I can rob? Is this somebody I can burglarize? Do they have valuables? We don't know what it is. And you've got to question, is that a factor in this case?
For like the next 6 or so months, anytime this car would drive by our house, honk, all hours of the night, honking, flipping us off. Like, it was surreal, I guess, because why even be on our property to begin with? One day, Chris had enough. I go outside and my husband is at the fence and the guy, you're screaming at each other. And I can't really make out what's being said until I approach and I hear, "You're lucky you have kids here, otherwise I'd burn your house down." And then he had threatened his life. But then after that, all activity stopped.
We know that Chris and Alicia said that nothing had happened recently involving, disputes with neighbors or any type of run-ins with tweakers or people strung out on opioids, but you've got to consider that. Given where they were living in the rural countryside, you've got to consider that perhaps something came up again.
I've lived down there. I haven't seen anything out of the ordinary, really. I don't really know too much about the situation.
I told the detective, and it took it pretty serious, but nothing really came of that.
I don't think he was forced out of the house or out of his vehicle, because knowing the Chris that I know, he would have done anything and everything to get away from anybody and everybody, or anybody trying to come up on his property. He has weapons. He has rifles, handguns, anything and everything that he would do to protect that family.
Given the lack of leads, the lack of clues in this case, anything could have happened to Chris.
June 2nd, I get a call from the detective saying that he's got the kids' mom on the phone and she wants to come get her kids. Chris's ex hasn't been in the picture for over 1.5 years now. In Peoria, Chris's ex wanted to see the kids. And at that time, she had told him that she had moved in with a guy. And Chris wanted to know his last name. She refused to tell them. And so every other weekend when it was her weekend, she'd ask for the kids, he'd ask for the guy's last name. She'd always refuse. And he goes, until you can tell me a name, you're not going to see the kids. 5 months later, she finally tells him his last name. And he's like, it's been 5 months. You have not been in their lives. You're going in and out like this is going to do more harm than good. And he goes, take me to court. At this point, take me to court. They're in a routine. No. And so she never took him to court. She never stepped foot on our property to see the kids, or neither did her family. And then we moved to Missouri. So when Chris disappeared, she calls me and she's like, I want my kids. I'm gonna come and get them. I will be there at 8 o'clock in the morning. And I'm like, that's no good. I'm not gonna disrupt their routine like that. I said, you realize you're gonna take them. Their dad just went missing. So they are dealing with the trauma from that. And you're gonna take them from the only family they know. You're gonna take them from their sisters. They're the only mom that they know. She says, I want my kids. And so that night I spend as much time with those kids as I can. And I soak up every minute. And they get a good night's sleep. And they eat breakfast the next morning. And I explain to them what has to happen. At one point, they were screaming at me not to make them go. And so I hand them over. I've never seen either of my kids cry so hard.
I don't really feel comfortable speaking about her too much. I don't have anything really good to say, especially with what's happened after he left.
Unfortunately, we just don't have a lot of information about what this custody dispute was like with his ex-girlfriend. Could that have been a factor in Chris's disappearance? I mean, you have to question.
How did the ex-girlfriend know that Chris went missing? How did she know?
I am not sure how Chris's ex found out that he went missing. When she called me on June 2nd, I asked her how she found out and she wouldn't tell me. She just said she found out. I don't know how she found out, but she did. And we found out on Facebook. She was here in Missouri, an hour away. The weekend he disappeared, mud racing or, four-wheeling or that kind of thing. That's odd. She's so close, and then my husband disappears. There are a lot of unanswered questions there. It makes a person wonder.
Christopher Hoy was last seen May 19th, 2022. If you have any information, please contact the Pulaski County Sheriff's Department at 573-774-6196.
And any disappearance motive is the central question. I mean, if you're gonna factor in possible foul play, who has a motive to do that? When you look at potential suspects, you've got to consider if they have an ex-girlfriend, did they have a bad breakup? When we look at Chris, we know that he did have this past relationship. We know that they had a bad breakup. We know that there was a custody dispute. There's motive there. Now, does that mean that anyone's guilty? No, but that's a factor that you've got to consider in this case. In my opinion, Chris's ex-girlfriend is suspicious.
The detective said that beyond that initial contact, she wouldn't call him back. It bugs me that no one can get any information out of her.
I'd like to get the detective to start questioning her boyfriend. I do believe something is there, and that's where we're at right now.
It is entirely possible that he has just chosen to voluntarily leave home. Maybe he wanted to start a new life again. And since we know that that cigarette is not the brand that Chris smoked, what that opens up is the possibility of there being another person in that truck. You've got to wonder, I mean, who is this person that was smoking this cigarette? Did he have a relationship we don't know about?
I started going through his Facebook, his email conversations, phone calls, and there were some emails missing. It's like up until May 19th, there was no emails. I thought it was very odd that my husband doesn't delete emails, and prior to May 19th, there were no emails, and he used that email regularly. So I thought it was very odd that out of all of this on his phone, it didn't look like he had deleted anything. And Facebook was still there, all his messages seemed to be there, but there were no emails.
The cops couldn't do anything about it because they're like, well, if they're deleted, like they're just out there somewhere and there's not really a way of getting them back. But that was really the biggest thing, was just that chunk of emails missing.
First and foremost, Chris would never have an affair when he's in love with someone, and we were in love. His past relationships, every single past relationship, had ended with the woman cheating on him. And I know how devastating that is, and he would not do that himself. There was not another woman.
At first I thought, okay, if something happened with him and Leash, or the homestead was too much, then he might have ran a little bit to get away.
Chris was a guy who was getting into his mid-30s, and it's not rare at all for men who get into their early 30s to have a midlife crisis and run away from home. I mean, that's not rare at all. That actually happens all the time. You know, it's something you've got to consider. It's going to be nearly impossible to find somebody in the Ozarks when they disappear. I mean, it's really this perfect place for a disappearance. It's very rural, it's rough ground. Not a lot of people live here, which means there's not going to be a lot of witnesses. There's no surveillance footage. Given all that, the chances of him being found are very remote.
9 months after Chris's disappearance, we moved down here to Missouri. And in March of 2023, I went to go for a job interview in Lebanon. And when I went in for the interview, I left, and I'm driving in the left lane, and I see somebody in a plumbing truck to the right of me. And it looks just like Chris. He acting like Chris. He was in the driver's seat, like rocking back and forth, laughing. He looked so much like Chris. By the time everything clicked in my head, I was taking the exit and he pulled into the gas station. But what if it was? You know, what if it was Chris and I just missed my shot to catch him?
It does add some weight to this idea that, you know, maybe he is alive. Maybe he did voluntarily disappear, want to start a new life. Maybe he ran away with somebody.
I need to call the detective. I gotta find my husband.
If you knew it looked like Chris, you knew he was missing, why didn't you take the time to walk up and say, hey, Chris? Or actually follow that plumber's van and just walk up and, you know, act like you were an old friend and see if it was him. You know, my thoughts are, you saw him, you didn't care to go chase after him? I mean, if I saw him, I'd have been jumping in my truck, and I don't care if they want to list me as a stalker or what. I'd have been on that van's tail all the way down. If I saw him leaving, I would have been right into my truck and following it.
I should have stopped to get gas because I kind of hold regret. Like I should have put more thought into that. Because like, what if it was him? And I stop at the same gas station every night now after I get off work, hoping to see that van. To this day, I still haven't found this van. I've looked everywhere. It's like it just disappeared.
But there have been a couple sightings of Chris, my daughter's boyfriend, Blake. Then I was in the feed store a few weeks later, and the same lady who keeps this poster up, she's like, I had a customer come in, and said he could have swore he saw Chris in Lebanon. That's 2 sightings in that same town. I couldn't wrap my head around it.
The sightings have all been so close to us, only 50 minutes away, and they definitely brought us hope, but like, why is he so close and he hasn't said anything?
Unfortunately, a lot of these sightings just didn't have a lot of details, and that means that there's really not anything to follow up on. It's just this noise.
And so I called the detective, didn't follow through with the sightings, and we're coming up on the year mark in May, and I call him and I said, okay, it's been a few months. What's it gonna take to get you to look into this? Well, it's really hard to, look for someone if we don't have any identifying information. So have you contacted these people? And at that point, I think he just kind of gave me a non-committal answer, because I can't tell you if he did or not.
I do believe that Pulaski Police Department down in Missouri dropped the ball big time, but we're not going to give up.
From an investigation standpoint, what else is there to do? I mean, no body has been found, no clue has been found. There's only random reports of sightings. What do you do if you're a detective? It may be that the law enforcement is thinking that he voluntarily disappeared.
When I hear about the sightings, it's actually really hard for me to believe that he'd be so close, but he's not at home. And I don't know what to think of it, because that's not my husband. My husband would never be so close, yet so far away from his family. So I honestly don't know. I don't know what to believe, and I don't know how to feel about it. I really don't. I don't see my husband willingly leaving his children. And even if we didn't have such a good marriage, which we did, he wouldn't have done that to those kids. He wouldn't have left those kids. And so I don't think this was his choice.
As this case hits the 1-year mark, there haven't been any new developments. And we really don't know how active the investigation is. It's more important now than ever to get this story out there, because getting Chris's face out there could be the key to solving this. And it's up to the media to help make that happen.
It's been 14 months and I haven't quit looking for my husband, and I won't. My kids deserve answers. I deserve answers. But it's really hard to take care of kids if you don't take care of yourself. And it's hard to find your husband if you're not taking care of yourself. So I had to make a decision. I could let this kill me, or I could let it make me stronger. And I chose to let it make me stronger.
I believe he was stressed and depressed, and maybe he just needed time. Do I think he's hurt? No. I don't believe he was forced to do anything. I don't think anybody can give anybody a clear answer on what it was.
The only thing I don't believe happened for sure was suicide. I absolutely do not think he committed suicide. I think it's possible it could have been foul play, but I also think it's possible that it was a mental breakdown and he left with the intentions of coming back. He just needed a break, but a 1.5 years later, where is he and why has no one found him?
This is a case that hasn't gotten a lot of traction. It hasn't gone viral. It hasn't gotten into the major media markets in the state, but at this point, there just isn't any evidence to give a clear picture of what happened to Chris. I mean, this case is truly a mystery.
We need him back. If nothing else, the little ones need him back, because they deserve to be raised with a father.
I've never had a better friend than my husband. He would tell Chris that he needs to come home. Life's not any good without him. Chris is loved.
The blood had already dried by the time the sun came up over rural Georgia, but the silence was still wet with shock. It was April 17, 2004, and the air in Pine Hollow carried the smell of damp earth, an early magnolia bloom, when a jogger cut across the gravel shoulder of County Road 16, and saw something that did not belong in the morning light. A car door hung open. The engine was cold. One tire dipped into a shallow ditch, as if the driver had stopped in a hurry, or been forced to. And 20 feet from the road, partially hidden by tall switchgrass bending in the wind, lay the body of 26-year-old Rebecca Lawson. Cold case, the headlines would later read. Small town nightmare. Community in shock. But in that first hour, it was only confusion. Only sirens breaking the quiet. Only a deputy kneeling in the grass, pulse racing, staring at the brutal geometry of a life interrupted. Rebecca had been shot once in the chest. Close range. No weapon at the scene. No purse. No sign of a prolonged struggle. Her keys still inside the ignition. Her phone missing. The red clay beneath her back already darkened. She had left her shift at the diner just after midnight. She had told her co-worker she was tired. She had laughed about a regular who flirted too much. She had planned to meet her sister for brunch the next morning. Ordinary words. Ordinary plans. The kind that dissolve instantly when a bullet rewrites the script. By noon, Pine Hollow was sealed in yellow tape and whispers. Population, 3,842. 1 main street. 2 churches. A high school football field where Friday nights mattered more than anything outside the county line. Violent crime here was something that happened somewhere else, Atlanta, Savannah, the cities on television. Not here. Not to one of their own. Rebecca wasn't just a name on a report. She had grown up 3 blocks from the sheriff's office. She had babysat for half the town. Her father had coached Little League for 15 years. People did not lock their doors in Pine Hollow. They waved at passing trucks. They trusted the dark. Now the dark felt different. Investigators worked the scene until dusk. They photographed tire impressions pressed into soft dirt. They bagged a cigarette, but found near the roadside. They measured the distance between the car and the body. They traced the arc of what might have been a brief struggle, flattened grass, a broken necklace clasp glinting faintly in the soil. No eyewitnesses. No security cameras. No nearby houses within shouting distance. A deputy remembered seeing Rebecca's car heading east around 12:20 a.m. That was the last confirmed sighting. After that, nothing but a stretch of empty road and a pocket of darkness that swallowed answers whole. The autopsy would confirm what the scene already suggested: a single gunshot wound, fired from less than 3 feet away. Powder stippling on her blouse. Time of death estimated between 12:30 and 1 a.m. No defensive wounds severe enough to suggest a prolonged fight. Toxicology clean. No evidence of sexual assault. Execution style, one investigator muttered under his breath. But execution implies intent. Planning. Motive. And motive was the first thing that refused to surface. Rebecca had no known enemies. No recent breakups. No threatening messages. Her finances were stable. Her social circle small and steady. Friends described her as cautious, not reckless. She did not pull over for strangers. She did not wander into isolated areas alone. So why stop there? That question echoed through the first week like a siren that never shut off. Detectives canvassed every house within a 5-mile radius. They knocked on doors until knuckles bruised. They asked about suspicious vehicles, strange noises, gunshots in the night. One farmer thought he heard a pop around 12:45, but assumed it was a truck backfiring. Another claimed he saw headlights parked along the road earlier that evening, but could not recall the make or model. Tips flooded in anyway. A jealous ex from 2 counties over. A drifter spotted at a gas station. A rumor about drug activity near the state line. Each lead tugged investigators in a different direction, each one unraveling under scrutiny. Rebecca's missing phone became the center of quiet obsession. In 2004, cell tracking was limited. Tower pings placed her last outgoing call, an unanswered dial to her sister, at 12:18 a.m., bouncing off a tower near downtown Pine Hollow. After that, silence. The device never resurfaced. Not in pawn shops. Not in ditches. Not in evidence lockers. Someone had taken it. Someone had wanted something erased. The cigarette, but collected from the roadside, was rushed to the state lab. DNA extracted. A male profile developed. It did not match anyone in the national database. Not then. Not in the months that followed. It sat in a file, labeled, catalogued, waiting for a name that did not exist. The town held a vigil 3 nights later. Candles flickered against the courthouse steps. Her mother stood rigid, hands trembling, as the pastor spoke about light in darkness. News vans lined the street, satellite dishes angled toward the sky. Microphones hovered like insects. Unsolved killing shocks Georgia community, the Chirons read. Shock gave way to fear. Parents drove their teenagers to school instead of letting them walk. The diner installed brighter exterior lights. Gun sales at the hardware store spiked. Every unfamiliar face became suspect. Every car idling too long drew curtains aside. Weeks turned into months. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation joined the case. Fresh eyes combed through transcripts. They re-interviewed co-workers. They mapped Rebecca's final movements minute by minute. They reconstructed her route home and drove it at midnight, headlights slicing through pine shadows. One detail nagged at them, the angle of the tire in the ditch. It suggested she had stopped voluntarily, at least at first. The car was not rammed. There were no skid marks indicating a sudden forced stop. It looked like someone had flagged her down, or she had recognized someone she trusted enough to pull over. Trusted. That word carried weight in a town like Pine Hollow. Investigators began to look closer at the familiar faces. They interviewed the regulars at the diner again, paying attention to subtle shifts in body language. One man, a mechanic named Travis Hale, admitted he had chatted with Rebecca that night. He said she left alone. Surveillance from a nearby gas station confirmed his truck heading in the opposite direction shortly after midnight. His alibi held. Another name surfaced quietly, Deputy Mark Ellison. He had been on duty that night. He knew Rebecca since she was a child. He was one of the first officers on scene. Some whispered that he looked too shaken, too invested. But phone records placed him responding to a noise complaint across town at the estimated time of death. Dispatch logs backed it up. Still, the whispers lingered. By the 1-year anniversary, the case had cooled. Leads exhausted. Interviews repeated until they blurred. The file thickened, but clarity did not. Rebecca's photograph remained pinned to a corkboard in the sheriff's office, her smile frozen, eyes bright with a future that never arrived. Cold case. The phrase settled over Pine Hollow like dust. Birthdays passed. Seasons shifted. The diner changed ownership. Rebecca's parents moved out of their house, unable to bear the weight of memories in every room. Her sister left the state, chasing distance that never quite stretched far enough. But the road on County 16 stayed the same. The grass grew back. The ditch filled and emptied with rain. Drivers passed the spot without knowing, or sometimes knowing too well. Every few years, the case resurfaced in local news. New tip in 2004 killing. Investigators re-examine evidence. Hope would flicker, brief and fragile, then fade again when nothing concrete followed. The DNA profile from the cigarette, but remained the most tangible thread. Technology advanced. Databases expanded. Each time the lab reran the sample, each time they compared it against new entries, deputies held their breath. No match. It became a ghost profile. A man without a name, tied forever to a roadside in Georgia. Rumors evolved over time. Some said Rebecca had stumbled onto something she shouldn't have seen. Others claimed it was a random act, a predator passing through. Conspiracy theories whispered about cover-ups, about evidence mishandled, about secrets buried deeper than the red clay. The truth was simpler and more terrifying: no one knew. And not knowing has a way of gnawing at a community's spine. 15 years later, a new sheriff took office. Younger. Restless. Unwilling to let old files gather quiet. He reopened Rebecca Lawson's case officially, not as a gesture, but as a mission. He requested every piece of evidence be retested with the latest forensic methods. He called in analysts who specialized in cold cases long thought unsolvable. Boxes were pulled from storage. Evidence bags examined under brighter lights. The broken necklace clasp retested for touch DNA. The car seats swabbed again. The soil samples reanalyzed. And always, that cigarette butt. The sheriff stared at the file one night long after the office had emptied, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. He studied Rebecca's last known movements. He traced the map with his finger. He imagined the moment she saw whoever approached her window. Did she smile in recognition? Did she feel a flicker of unease too late? Outside, the same Georgia wind moved through pine trees, whispering across years that refused to stay buried. In Pine Hollow, some residents had stopped believing the case would ever be solved. Others never stopped waiting. Because unresolved violence does not fade. It lingers in glances, in cautious pauses, in the way a town holds its breath when headlights slow along an empty road. The killing of Rebecca Lawson had become more than a crime. It was a wound that never closed. And somewhere, whether in Georgia or beyond state lines, a man carried the memory of that night, the flash of a gunshot, the metallic scent of blood, the knowledge that he had stepped back into darkness while a town stumbled into grief. For years, he remained a shadow without a name. But shadows, given enough time, begin to thin. And in the quiet evidence room of a small sheriff's office, beneath layers of dust and doubt, something long dormant was about to stir. The break did not come with sirens or shouting. It came in the form of a phone call from a forensic lab 3 states away, a voice calm and clinical, delivering words that carried the weight of 18 silent years. Partial familial match. Not a direct hit. Not the name of a killer flashing across a screen. Just a statistical whisper, strong enough to matter, fragile enough to vanish if handled wrong. The cigarette, but from County Road 16, had been uploaded into a newer genealogical database, one that did not exist in 2004. Investigators had watched other cold cases fall this way: Golden State Killer, decades-old rapes, nameless predators finally pulled into the light by distant cousins who had simply wanted to trace their ancestry. Now Pine Hollow had its own flicker of possibility. The DNA profile matched partially to a man in Tennessee who had submitted his genetic data to a public genealogy site. The lab couldn't say the man was the suspect. Only that he shared enough markers to suggest a close biological relationship, possibly a brother. Possibly a son. The sheriff felt the air shift in his office when he heard the name, Daniel Carter. 48 years old. Warehouse supervisor. No serious criminal record. Married. 2 kids. Lived outside Chattanooga. Nothing in his file screamed violent offender. No weapons charges. No domestic violence complaints. Clean on the surface. But Daniel Carter had a younger brother. Michael Carter. 32 years old in 2004. Lived in Georgia at the time of Rebecca's death. Address listed just 20 miles from Pine Hollow. Worked odd construction jobs. Arrested twice in his early 20s, once for bar fighting, once for illegal possession of a firearm. Charges reduced. Records sealed in parts. After 2006, he seemed to disappear from Georgia databases altogether. The room went very still. Investigators rebuilt Michael Carter's timeline from scraps. DMV records. Old employment forms. Rental agreements. He had moved frequently. Short leases. Cash payments. No steady anchor. In April 2004, he had been living in a rented trailer outside Pine Hollow, less than a 15-minute drive from where Rebecca's body was found. No one had interviewed him back then. His name never surfaced in the original canvas. He had not been on law enforcement's radar in connection to Rebecca. He was just another drifter on the edge of town. But now, his DNA might be tethered to a cigarette, but lying in the grass beside her body. Investigators moved carefully. Too early for confrontation. Too early for celebration. Genealogical matches can mislead. They can fracture families. They can evaporate under scrutiny. They needed Michael's DNA. Problem: Michael Carter had vanished. After 2006, the paper trail thinned. A traffic citation in Alabama. A short stint in a roofing company in Mississippi. Then nothing. No updated driver's license. No recent tax filings. No arrest records. It was as if he had stepped off the grid. Had he fled? Or had he simply drifted, like so many men who never quite settle? Detectives tracked down Daniel Carter first, the brother whose voluntary ancestry test had cracked the silence. They approached him gently, careful not to reveal too much. He sat across from them in a modest Tennessee kitchen, confusion etched into his face as they explained a decades-old Georgia homicide. "I haven't seen Michael in years," Daniel said, fingers laced tight. "He never stayed in one place long. We weren't close." "Did Michael ever talk about Pine Hollow? About a woman named Rebecca Lawson?" Daniel shook his head slowly. Then paused. "He worked construction down there. Said it was boring. Said the town felt like it was watching him." Watching him? The phrase lingered. Daniel agreed to provide another DNA sample to strengthen the familial comparison. The lab confirmed it, the unknown male DNA from the cigarette, but was almost certainly from a close biological relative of Daniel Carter. The probability calculations narrowed sharply. All signs pointed to Michael. Now the search turned urgent. Investigators cross-referenced Social Security activity. They found a recent employer listed in rural Arkansas, a logging company paying under-the-table wages. A tip from a former co-worker placed Michael in a small town near the Ozarks, living alone in a rented cabin. A team assembled quietly. No press. No leaks. The sheriff did not want the town celebrating prematurely. They had been burned by hope before. When they found Michael Carter, he looked older than his 54 years. Weathered skin. Sunken eyes. A beard gone mostly gray. He answered the door cautiously, gaze flicking to the unmarked vehicles parked along the dirt road. Michael Carter, one investigator asked. Who's asking? They did not mention Rebecca immediately. They asked for a voluntary DNA sample related to an old case. They watched his shoulders tighten, just slightly. A flicker. A micro-expression that only seasoned detectives notice. What case? He asked. A 2004 homicide in Georgia. Silence. The woods around the cabin seemed to lean in closer. Michael exhaled slowly. I haven't lived in Georgia in years. We know. He hesitated long enough to matter. Then he refused. Without consent, investigators needed probable cause for a warrant. The genealogical match was strong, but not enough alone. They needed something more, something tying Michael physically to Pine Hollow on the night Rebecca died. They dug deeper. An old employment record placed Michael at a construction site just outside Pine Hollow in April 2004. Payroll logs showed he had clocked out at 11:30 p.m. the night Rebecca was killed. That site was 10 minutes from the diner where she worked. A former co-worker remembered Michael owning a dark green pickup truck back then. Older model. Loud muffler. Investigators pulled archived witness statements from 2004. One farmer had mentioned seeing headlights parked along County Road 16 before midnight. He thought it might have been a truck. At the time, it was too vague to pursue. Now it felt sharper. They located DMV records confirming Michael had registered a 1994 Ford F-150 in Georgia in early 2004. Color, dark green. Another thread tightened. Still, it wasn't enough. Then came the detail that shifted the balance. Retesting Rebecca's broken necklace clasp with advanced touch DNA analysis revealed a faint secondary profile, too degraded to fully identify, but consistent with the same unknown male DNA found on the cigarette butt. Two separate pieces of evidence. Same genetic ghost. A judge signed the warrant. Michael Carter was brought in for questioning in Arkansas, transported quietly to Georgia. No handcuffs visible to the public. No media presence. Just a man stepping into a sheriff's office that had carried his shadow unknowingly for nearly 2 decades. In the interrogation room, under fluorescent lights that hummed like they had in 2004, Michael sat rigid, eyes scanning the walls as if looking for exits that did not exist. The sheriff placed a photograph on the table. Rebecca Lawson. Smiling. Alive. Do you remember her? He asked. Michael's jaw tightened. No. You lived 20 minutes from where she was found. I've lived a lot of places. We have your brother's DNA in a genealogy database. It links you to evidence at the scene. Silence again. Longer this time. You're making a mistake, Michael said finally, voice low. They took his DNA pursuant to the warrant. A cheek swab. Simple. Clinical. The kind of procedure that can shatter decades of denial. The lab rushed the comparison. Days stretched thin. Pine Hollow did not yet know. Rebecca's family did not yet know. Only a handful of officials sat suspended between past and present, waiting for numbers to confirm what instinct was already whispering. When the results arrived, the room felt smaller. The DNA from the cigarette, but matched Michael Carter with near certainty. The degraded touch DNA on the necklace clasp was also consistent with him. The statistical probability of another individual sharing that profile was astronomically low. 18 years. 18 years of vigils and rumors and sleepless nights. And now, a name. Michael Carter was arrested and charged with the murder of Rebecca Lawson. The news hit Pine Hollow like a thunderclap. Georgia 2004 unsolved killing solved, the headlines screamed. Cameras returned to the courthouse steps. Microphones reappeared. Residents who had once whispered now spoke openly, shock etched into aging faces. He had lived among them. Worked nearby. Driven those same roads. Rebecca's mother stood before reporters, voice trembling but steady enough to carry, "We never stopped believing." But as the legal process began to turn, motions filed, defense attorneys appointed, court dates scheduled, another question surfaced, darker and more complicated than the first. Why? Because even with DNA, even with arrest, even with headlines declaring resolution, the motive remained buried in the red Georgia clay. And in the interrogation room, when pressed about that night, Michael Carter continued to say only 3 words. "I didn't do it." Outside, Pine Hollow felt the old wound reopen, not from uncertainty this time, but from the realization that justice, even delayed, does not erase what was taken. And as the case moved toward trial, the community braced itself for details long hidden to finally rise into the light, details that would force them to relive April 17, 2004, frame by frame, breath by breath, until the silence that had haunted them either shattered completely or grew louder than ever. The courtroom filled before sunrise. By the time the doors opened, the hallway outside the Pine Hollow County Courthouse was already thick with reporters, retirees, former classmates, and strangers who had driven hours just to witness the unraveling of a mystery that had haunted Georgia for nearly 2 decades. The wooden benches inside creaked under the weight of expectation. The air felt charged, brittle, as if one wrong word could split it open. Michael Carter sat at the defense table in a navy suit that didn't quite fit, shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on nothing. He looked smaller than he had in the mugshot that splashed across television screens weeks earlier. But the stillness around him wasn't weakness. It was calculation. Or maybe denial calcified into something harder. Across the aisle, Rebecca Lawson's family held hands. The prosecution moved first, methodical, controlled, confident. They didn't shout. They didn't dramatize. They let the evidence speak in the language of science. DNA does not forget. The cigarette, but found near Rebecca's body. The touched DNA on the broken necklace clasp. The statistical probability, 1 in several trillion. The lab analyst explained it in steady tones, projecting charts onto a screen. Colored markers. Genetic loci. Cold, precise numbers that sliced through years of doubt. The jurors leaned forward. Defense attorneys countered immediately. Genealogical databases, they argued, are not foolproof. Contamination can occur. Evidence stored for 18 years can degrade, shift, be mishandled. They questioned chain of custody from 2004. They highlighted minor discrepancies in early documentation, an evidence bag logged at 9:42 a.m., but signed at 9:47. 5 minutes. 5 minutes that now carried enormous weight. Reasonable doubt. That phrase hovered over everything. The prosecution brought in the retired deputy, who had first secured the scene. His hair was thinner now. His hands trembled slightly, as he described kneeling in the grass beside Rebecca's body. He walked the jury through the position of the car. The tire in the ditch. The absence of skid marks. It looked like she stopped willingly, he said. Willingly. The word echoed. Next came the farmer, who had reported seeing headlights along County Road 16 that night. His memory had faded around the edges, but one detail remained sharp. I remember thinking it was odd, he testified. A truck parked there that late. Engine off. Just sitting. Could you identify the truck? The prosecutor asked. No. Too dark. The defense seized on that. Too dark. Too vague. Memory shaped by time and suggestion. Then the prosecution shifted the narrative. They introduced payroll records, placing Michael Carter 10 minutes from the diner at 11:30 p.m. They presented DMV documents confirming his ownership of a dark green 1994 Ford F-150. They showed a map tracing the route from his worksite to the stretch of road where Rebecca was killed. 10 minutes. That's all. A former co-worker took the stand. He described Michael as quiet, kept to himself. He mentioned that Michael had once complained about women at the diner, thinking they were better than everyone else. The defense objected, character evidence. The judge allowed limited testimony. The jury watched Michael closely during that moment. His jaw tightened again, the same subtle reaction investigators had noted months earlier in Arkansas. But the most powerful testimony came unexpectedly. Rebecca's sister. She walked to the stand with a folder clutched tightly against her chest. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied as she described the missed call at 12:18 a.m. She had been asleep. She didn't hear it until morning. She never called that late unless something was wrong, she said. She would have driven straight home. She wouldn't stop for a stranger. The implication hung heavy in the room. So who would she stop for? The prosecution didn't answer directly. They didn't need to. They let the jury draw the line from familiarity to vulnerability. Then came the interrogation footage. Michael Carter under fluorescent light. The photograph of Rebecca sliding across the metal table. His denial, calm, repetitive, unwavering. I didn't do it. The prosecution paused the video at key moments. They highlighted his body language when DNA was mentioned. The slight delay before he responded. The tightening of his shoulders. Behavioral interpretation. Not proof, but pressure. The defense pushed back harder now. They argued that DNA on a cigarette, but proves proximity, not murder. Maybe Michael had driven that road another night. Maybe he had tossed the cigarette days earlier. Maybe someone else committed the crime, and his DNA was coincidental. Coincidental. The word felt fragile against the weight of evidence, but the defense clung to it. Then they introduced a new angle. Cell tower records from 2004 were imprecise. The coverage area overlapped miles of roadway. There was no direct evidence placing Michael's phone near County Road 16 at the exact time of death. In fact, they argued, there was no verified record of him contacting Rebecca at all. No text messages. No calls. No known connection. Random encounter. The prosecution had not proven it. The courtroom temperature seemed to rise with every exchange. Outside, news trucks lined the street again. Georgia cold case trial grips nation, one anchor declared into a camera. Inside, the jury scribbled notes. Then came the forensic reconstruction expert. He walked them through the likely sequence. Rebecca leaves the diner. She drives east. A familiar truck pulls alongside, maybe flashes headlights. She recognizes the driver, someone she's seen around town, someone from nearby construction sites. She slows. Pulls slightly off the road. A conversation. Brief? Maybe tense. The expert pointed to the powder stippling pattern. Close range. Face to face. One shot, he said. Quick. Controlled. Controlled. The defense objected to that word. Speculative. The judge sustained partially, instructing the jury to disregard characterization beyond the physical evidence. Still, the image had formed. Michael Carter did not testify. That silence spoke loudly to some. To others, it was a constitutional right exercised wisely. As the trial moved into its second week, cracks began to appear, not in the evidence, but in the timeline. A gas station attendant from a neighboring county testified that he believed he saw Michael around 1:15 a.m. the night of the murder, buying beer. The defense seized on it as an alibi. But under cross-examination, the attendant admitted he could not be certain of the date. It was around that time, he said. I think. Memory again. Slippery. Eroded by years. The prosecution returned to what they had that could not fade, DNA. They explained transfer probabilities. They addressed contamination concerns. Chain of custody logs were displayed line by line, signatures verified, timestamps clarified. The evidence had been sealed, preserved, retested under strict protocols. Science had bridged 18 years. In closing arguments, the prosecutor stood inches from the jury box. For nearly 2 decades, she said, voice steady but intense, Rebecca Lawson's family waited. The community waited. The man responsible walked free. But DNA does not care about time. It does not forget. It does not lie. The defense followed with equal force. Science is powerful, he said. But it is not infallible. The state asks you to convict a man based on a cigarette, but on assumptions about a truck seen in the dark. That is not beyond reasonable doubt. Reasonable doubt. The phrase circled back like a refrain. When the jury retired to deliberate, Pine Hollow held its breath again, just as it had in 2004. Just as it had when the DNA match first surfaced. Hours passed. Rebecca's mother sat motionless in the front row. Michael Carter stared at the table in front of him, expression unreadable. Outside, clouds gathered over the courthouse dome, heavy and gray. After 2 days, the jury returned. The 4-person stood, hands shaking slightly. On the charge of malice murder. The word guilty sliced through the room like the crack of a gunshot echoing across years. Michael Carter did not react at first. Then his shoulders sagged, just barely. His wife began to sob behind him. Rebecca's sister closed her eyes, as if bracing against a wave that had finally broken. Justice, the headlines would say. Georgia 2004 unsolved killing solved. But as deputies led Michael Carter away in handcuffs, as cameras flashed and microphones surged forward, one question still lingered in the quiet spaces between celebration and grief. Why did he do it? Because even with a conviction, even with a verdict carved into record, motive remained a shadow. And shadows, no matter how bright the courtroom lights, have a way of stretching long into the night. Sentencing day arrived without ceremony. No thunder. No dramatic revelation. Just the slow, grinding continuation of a case that had already torn through 2 decades of silence. The courtroom was quieter this time, stripped of the fever that had surrounded the verdict. The word guilty had settled over Pine Hollow like dust after an explosion, thick, undeniable, but not clean. Michael Carter stood to hear his fate. The prosecution asked for life without parole. They spoke of calculated violence. Of a young woman stopped on a dark road and executed at close range. Of 18 years stolen from a family waiting for answers. The defense asked for mercy. No prior violent convictions. No proven motive. A case built on DNA and inference. They argued that even now, questions lingered. Questions. That word again. The judge adjusted his glasses and read from a prepared statement. He spoke about the weight of delayed justice. About the community's resilience. About the brutality of a single gunshot in the night. His voice remained steady as he imposed the sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole. A quiet gasp rippled through the gallery. Rebecca's mother wept silently. Michael Carter stared forward, jaw clenched, eyes empty. And still, he did not confess. Even as deputies led him away for the final time, even as reporters shouted questions into the corridor, "Why did you do it? Do you have anything to say to the Lawson family?" He remained silent. No apology. No explanation. The prison gates closed behind him weeks later with a metallic finality. Officially, the case was closed. Solved. Resolved. But resolution is not the same as understanding. Investigators revisited the file one last time, not for court, not for headlines, but for themselves. They combed through interview transcripts, searching for a thread that might explain what had never been spoken aloud. There had been no known relationship between Michael Carter and Rebecca Lawson. No phone records connecting them. No eyewitness placing them together before that night. If he had watched her at the diner, he had done so quietly. If he had followed her, he had done so unnoticed. Random violence. Opportunity. Or something more personal that never surfaced. In prison intake interviews, Michael offered nothing. Psychological evaluations described him as guarded, emotionally detached, resistant to discussion of the crime. When asked directly about Rebecca, he reportedly responded with the same 3 words he had repeated since Arkansas. "I didn't do it." Denial hardened into routine. Back in Pine Hollow, the road on County 16 remained unchanged. The ditch had been filled years earlier. The grass cut back. Drivers slowed instinctively when passing the stretch where Rebecca had been found, as if memory still lived in the soil. The town tried to move forward. The diner held a small memorial on the anniversary of the verdict. A framed photo of Rebecca placed near the register. Customers spoke her name openly now, no longer in whispers. For some, the conviction brought relief, a sense that the darkness had finally been identified and contained. For others, it brought discomfort. A few residents questioned the reliance on genealogical databases. They worried about privacy, about precedent. They wondered aloud whether science had leapt too confidently across 18 years. Defense attorneys filed an appeal within months, arguing procedural errors and challenging the admissibility of the genealogical lead that had pointed investigators toward Michael in the first place. The case climbed slowly through appellate courts, legal briefs stacking higher, language dense and technical. Rebecca's family braced for more waiting. Appeals can take years. In the meantime, journalists dug deeper into Michael Carter's past. They interviewed former neighbors from Georgia, Tennessee, Mississippi. A pattern emerged, not of overt violence, but of instability. Short tempers. Abrupt departures. An undercurrent of resentment toward authority, toward women who looked down on him, as one former acquaintance put it. But nothing concrete. Nothing that transformed suspicion into motive. Then, nearly a year after sentencing, a letter arrived at the sheriff's office. No return address. Postmarked from a correctional facility. Inside, a single sheet of paper. Handwritten. The sheriff read it alone. It was from Michael. Not a confession. Not exactly. He wrote about April 2004. About feeling invisible. About driving aimlessly after work some nights, because he couldn't stand the silence of the trailer he rented. He mentioned stopping on County Road 16 once to smoke, to think. But he never explicitly admitted to pulling a trigger. He wrote, "People think they know what happened because of numbers and charts. They don't know what was in my head. They don't know what she said." What she said. It was the first time he had implied any interaction at all. The letter stopped short of clarity. No direct acknowledgement of guilt. No details about the confrontation. Just fragments, anger, humiliation, a sense of being mocked. Investigators read between the lines. Had Rebecca rejected him? Had a brief exchange escalated in seconds? A flash of wounded pride turning lethal? The prosecution chose not to publicize the letter. It was too ambiguous. Too incomplete. But word leaked, as it always does in small towns. Speculation reignited. Some believed the letter was a veiled admission. Others saw it as manipulation, a man still clinging to control by withholding the full truth. Rebecca's sister read the letter months later, through tears. "She didn't deserve to be reduced to someone's bad night," she said quietly. And that was the final cruelty. For 18 years, Rebecca Lawson had been a symbol, a cold case, a headline, a community wound. The conviction restored her name in legal records, but it could not restore the life she would have lived. The children she might have had. The ordinary mornings she never saw. Michael Carter's appeal was eventually denied. The conviction upheld. The DNA evidence affirmed as legally obtained and scientifically sound. The genealogical lead ruled admissible. On paper, the system had worked. But closure is rarely as clean as a verdict form. In Pine Hollow, older residents still remember the morning sirens in 2004. Younger ones know the story as something that happened before. The road remains just a road. The diner serves coffee to new faces. Life folds over tragedy, layer by layer. Yet on certain nights, when the wind moves through the pines just right, when headlights sweep briefly across that stretch of County 16, some swear the air feels heavier there. Because even solved cases leave echoes. Rebecca Lawson's killing no longer sits in a dusty file marked unsolved. It stands recorded, adjudicated, punished. But the moment itself, the instant a young woman pulled her car slightly into a ditch, rolled down her window, and faced someone she believed she recognized, that moment remains suspended in darkness. One shot. One decision. One silence that stretched across 18 years. And though a name has been attached, a sentence imposed, and a headline declared resolution, the truth of what passed between them in those final seconds belongs only to two people. One is gone. The other will likely carry it, unspoken, to his grave. Prison has a way of flattening men. Inside the concrete geometry of Georgia State Penitentiary, Michael Carter became an inmate number, a routine, a body counted twice a day. The outside world reduced him to a headline, already fading from national memory. But in Pine Hollow, the story never fully receded. It lingered in coffee shop conversations, in late-night radio call-ins, in the uneasy pauses when someone mentioned County Road 16. Life without parole is supposed to be final. Yet finality does not silence curiosity. 3 months after his transfer, a corrections officer reported that Michael had requested access to the prison law library almost daily. Not unusual. Many inmates chase appeals long after the odds collapse. But what caught attention was something else. He had also requested access to archived newspapers from 2004. Specifically, local Pine Hollow editions. Investigators were informed quietly. It meant nothing legally. The case was closed. Appeals exhausted. But psychologically, it stirred something. Why revisit the coverage of a crime he insisted he did not commit? In one monitored phone call to his brother Daniel, Michael's voice carried a low, controlled intensity. They built a story, he said. They needed someone. Daniel replied carefully. The DNA. DNA doesn't tell you what happened, Michael cut in. It doesn't tell you what she did. Again. What she did. The phrasing unsettled even those who had already seen him convicted. It suggested narrative. Interaction. A trigger point. Prison psychologists attempted follow-up sessions. Michael remained evasive. He described childhood instability, frequent moves, a father who drank too much and corrected too hard. He spoke about resentment, about feeling dismissed by people who thought they were better. He never said Rebecca's name. Meanwhile, back in Pine Hollow, another ripple surfaced. A retired GBI analyst reviewing archived cold cases stumbled across something unsettling. In late 2003, 5 months before Rebecca's death, there had been a reported roadside confrontation just outside a neighboring county. A woman had told deputies that a man in a dark green pickup followed her for several miles, flashing headlights, gesturing for her to pull over. She refused. He eventually sped past her, shouting something unintelligible. At the time, it was logged as harassment. No plate number captured. No arrest made. The analyst cross-referenced vehicle registrations from that period. Michael Carter had owned a dark green 1994 Ford F-150. The incident had never been connected to Rebecca's case. It had been buried in a stack of minor reports during the early investigation when attention was scattered. Now, it resurfaced like something half-remembered. Investigators tracked down the woman who had made the 2003 report. She was older now, living in South Carolina. She agreed to speak on record. I remember feeling like prey, she said. He kept getting close to my bumper. Like he wanted me to stop. Could she identify Michael Carter as that man? She studied a recent prison photo carefully. I can't be certain, she admitted. It's been a long time. Not evidence. Not enough to reopen anything. But enough to paint a sharper silhouette. A pattern. Lonely roads. Late nights. Headlights signaling. Rebecca's stop on County Road 16 began to look less spontaneous. The prosecution declined to pursue additional charges or publicize the 2003 incident. The conviction stood firm. There was no need to expand the narrative legally. But for Rebecca's family, learning about the earlier roadside encounter was like reopening a wound. So he might have done this before, her sister whispered during a private meeting with investigators. Or tried to. The thought reframed everything. Not a sudden argument. Not an impulsive explosion. But potential rehearsal. Escalation. In prison, Michael's behavior remained controlled. No violent infractions. No fights. He kept to himself, read often, exercised in the yard without engaging much conversation. Inmates described him as cold rather than aggressive. One guard reported overhearing him say to another inmate, "They think they know the whole story." The whole story. There it was again, an insistence that something remained untold. A year after sentencing, a documentary crew approached the sheriff's office requesting interviews for a true crime series about genealogical DNA breakthroughs. They wanted Rebecca's case as a centerpiece, Georgia 2004 unsolved killing solved. The sheriff agreed cautiously, on the condition that the focus remain on evidence, not spectacle. During filming, they revisited County Road 16 at night. Cameras rolled as headlights cut through the same stretch of darkness where Rebecca had stopped. The narrator spoke about trust, about how small towns blur the line between familiarity and safety. The episode aired nationally. Letters began arriving at the prison after that. Some condemning Michael. Some, disturbingly, expressing doubt about the conviction, fueled by online forums questioning forensic certainty. Conspiracy theories bloomed in digital corners. Claims of planted evidence. Of corrupt investigators desperate for closure. Michael responded to none of them. But one letter, according to prison mail logs, he kept. It was from a woman who wrote, "Sometimes people are pushed." No signature beyond a first name. No return address. Investigators never learned who sent it. Back in Pine Hollow, the Lawson family chose not to participate in online debates. For them, the verdict was enough. The science was enough. The 18-year wait had been enough. Still, the absence of a full confession left a hollow space. At a private memorial marking 20 years since Rebecca's death, her father spoke quietly to a small gathering beneath the courthouse oak tree. "We got justice," he said. "But we didn't get the truth." Justice answers who? Truth answers why. In the years following the conviction, advances in forensic psychology reshaped how experts discussed cases like Rebecca's. Studies highlighted patterns of perceived rejection, triggering sudden violence in individuals with underlying resentment. Researchers spoke of narcissistic injury, of fragile identities collapsing under minor slights. Speculation circulated that Rebecca may have refused a ride, dismissed a comment, or simply failed to respond the way Michael expected. One moment. One sentence. One look. Enough. Yet without his words, it remained theory. Michael Carter will likely spend the rest of his life within concrete walls, the rhythms of prison replacing the open roads he once drove. His appeals exhausted, his case cited now in legal textbooks as an example of genealogical DNA success. In Pine Hollow, the headline remains etched into memory. Georgia 2004 unsolved killing solved. But sometimes, late at night, when the town quiets and the wind threads through the pines, there's a different headline that lingers beneath it, quieter, harder to print. What really happened on County Road 16? Because a solved case is not always a fully told story. And somewhere in a prison cell, under fluorescent lights that never quite turn off, a man who has denied, implied, and withheld for years still carries the final seconds of Rebecca Lawson's life locked behind his teeth. One shot. One stretch of road. One truth that may never be spoken aloud. Time moved forward. The case did not. 2 years after the conviction, Pine Hollow had settled back into something that looked like normal. Friday night football. Church picnics. The diner repainting its sign. On the surface, the wound had scarred over. But scars itch. It started with a podcast. A national true crime series picked up Rebecca Lawson's story and framed it differently, not as a triumphant example of forensic genealogy, but as a case study in the dangers of delayed certainty. The host's voice was calm, persuasive, almost sympathetic toward doubt. 18 years, she said into a microphone heard by millions. Memories fade. Evidence degrades. Pressure builds. When a community wants closure badly enough, are we sure science isn't sometimes asked to do more than it can? The episode dissected every procedural detail. Chain of custody logs. Storage temperatures. The 5-minute discrepancy in evidence signatures from 2004. They interviewed a defense-hired forensic consultant who claimed that touch DNA, especially from degraded samples, can be transferred indirectly. Secondary transfer. The phrase spread quickly online. Could Michael Carter's DNA have been transferred onto the necklace clasped through casual contact days earlier? decode the cigarette, but have been left on that road at another time entirely. The prosecution declined to engage publicly. The conviction had been affirmed. Appeals denied. The science vetted. But in Pine Hollow, doubt crept back in through digital channels. Not widespread. Not dominant. But present. Rebecca's sister refused to listen to the podcast. Her father did, and turned it off halfway through. They weren't there, he said quietly. They didn't see her. Meanwhile, something else surfaced. A former inmate, who had briefly shared a housing unit with Michael Carter, contacted a journalist anonymously. He claimed that Michael had once spoken about teaching someone a lesson on a dark road years ago. No names. No specifics. Just a fragment overheard in the yard. Journalists pressed the Department of Corrections for confirmation. None given. Prison conversations are fluid, unreliable, often distorted by ego or fear. But the quote hit like gasoline. Teaching someone a lesson. It aligned too neatly with the psychological profile experts had speculated about: perceived humiliation escalating into lethal violence. Investigators quietly requested access to prison monitoring reports. Official transcripts of recorded calls revealed nothing overt. Michael remained disciplined in his language. No admissions. No incriminating boasts. Still, the phrase hung in the air. At the same time, an independent forensic lab, funded by a criminal justice reform group, offered to reanalyze the remaining physical evidence using even newer DNA sequencing techniques. Not to overturn the verdict, they claimed, but to increase public confidence. The sheriff's office faced a choice. Refuse, and risk feeding suspicion. Allow it, and risk reopening wounds. They agreed. Evidence that had already endured 18 years of storage was transported under strict protocol to the independent lab. Every transfer documented. Every seal photographed. Weeks passed. News outlets speculated daily. Could Georgia cold case conviction be challenged? New DNA tests ordered. Pine Hollow braced itself. When the independent lab results returned, they did not weaken the original findings. They strengthened them. Advanced sequencing confirmed the match to Michael Carter with even greater statistical certainty. No evidence of mixed or secondary profiles on the necklace clasp beyond Rebecca and Michael. No signs of contamination. The cigarette, but DNA profile was clean, singular, consistent. The reform group released a statement acknowledging the results. The podcast host issued a follow-up episode. Science stands, she said. The online forums quieted. But something unexpected happened inside the prison walls. Shortly after the renewed testing confirmed his guilt beyond further scientific doubt, Michael Carter requested a meeting with the prison chaplain. Not unusual. But this time, he asked for it to be documented. The chaplain later described the meeting only in broad strokes, bound by confidentiality. He said Michael appeared tired. Not angry. Not defensive. Just tired. He said he was carrying something heavy, the chaplain noted in a private log later obtained through court filings. He spoke about that night without naming it. He said sometimes a moment can define a life. The chaplain asked directly, "Did you kill her?" Michael did not answer. Instead, he said, "I wish I could rewind 10 seconds. 10 seconds." For the first time, the timeline narrowed. 10 seconds between recognition and gunfire. Between pride and violence. Between a conversation and a corpse in the grass. The chaplain urged him to confess, to offer the Lawson family clarity. Michael reportedly stared at his hands for a long time. Confession doesn't bring her back, he said finally. No written statement followed. No formal admission. But word of the meeting leaked months later, during a routine prison audit that referenced increased counseling sessions for inmate Carter. The Lawson family was informed privately. Rebecca's sister absorbed the detail in silence. 10 seconds, she repeated softly. That's all it took. In Pine Hollow, the road remains unchanged. The trees have grown taller. The ditch fills with rain each spring. Drivers still pass without stopping. But now, led over the memory of uncertainty, over the years of waiting, over the courtroom verdict and the scientific confirmation, there is a chilling clarity. It may not have been a grand conspiracy. Not a long-term obsession documented in letters or calls. It may have been 10 seconds. 10 seconds of wounded ego. 10 seconds of rage. 10 seconds where a man chose violence over walking away. And that is perhaps the most unsettling truth of all. Because monsters are easier to understand when they look monstrous. Michael Carter did not look monstrous. He looked ordinary. He lived quietly. He moved often. He blended. The headline declared the case solved. The courts affirmed it. The science reinforced it. But the final truth, the exact words exchanged, the expression on Rebecca's face, the flicker in Michael's mind, remains locked in a memory only he fully possesses. 10 seconds on County Road 16. One decision. A lifetime of consequences. And a community that will never drive that stretch of road without remembering how quickly normal can fracture into tragedy. The years did what years always do, they softened the noise but sharpened the outline. 5 years after the conviction, Pine Hollow no longer saw satellite trucks on Main Street. The courthouse steps were quiet again. The diner replaced Rebecca's framed photo with a larger memorial near the entrance, less about the crime now, more about the girl she had been, laughing in a softball uniform, flour on her cheek from a kitchen shift, arms wrapped around her sister on a summer afternoon long before County Road 16 became a landmark of grief. But inside the prison walls, something shifted. Michael Carter began writing. Not letters to journalists. Not appeals. Pages, legal pads filled in tight, controlled handwriting. He requested extra paper from the commissary. He wrote at night under dim fluorescent light, long after his cellmate fell asleep. When a routine inspection flagged the growing stack of pages, corrections officers skimmed them for contraband. They found none. Just narrative. Fragments of childhood. Stories about moving from county to county. A father who believed weakness had to be crushed early. A mother who rarely intervened. Fights at school. The first time he felt publicly humiliated, laughed at during a high school presentation when his voice cracked. Humiliation. The word repeated. Then the writing narrowed toward 2004. He described the construction job outside Pine Hollow. The heat. The long drives back to the trailer. The sense that everyone in town knew everyone, except him. I was invisible there, one page read. Like I didn't exist unless someone needed something built. He wrote about the diner. About going in after shifts sometimes. About watching the regulars joke with Rebecca. About how easily she moved through the room. He did not describe stalking. He did not describe obsession. But he described noticing. She looked at people like she already knew who they were, he wrote. Like she had them figured out. The pages stopped short of naming the night itself. Until they didn't. In a section marked only with the date April 17th, no year written, he described driving after work. Restless. Smoking with the windows down. Headlights cutting across empty road. I saw her car ahead, he wrote. Recognized it from the diner parking lot. Recognized it. He wrote that he flashed his headlights. That she slowed. He wrote that he told himself it was harmless. Just conversation. The narrative tightened. She rolled down the window a little. Not all the way. He described saying something. He never wrote the exact words. He described her expression changing. Annoyance. Dismissal. She said something about going home. Like I was wasting her time. Then the writing became jagged, sentences shorter. I felt small. I heard myself talking, but don't remember what I said. She laughed. That detail had never appeared in evidence. No one had testified about laughter. No witness could confirm it. Whether real or reconstructed through years of resentment, it existed vividly in his account. She laughed and looked away like I was nothing. The next line was written darker, the pen pressed harder into the page. I didn't mean to. He described reaching into the truck. He described carrying the gun habitually back then, a leftover from feeling unsafe in places he never stayed long. He described 10 seconds. 10 seconds of heat in his chest. 10 seconds of pride unraveling. 10 seconds where walking away felt impossible. Then, it went off. Not, I pulled the trigger. It went off. Language shifting blame onto the weapon, onto the moment. He wrote about silence after the shot. About her eyes wide, confused more than afraid. About stepping back. About the smell. He wrote about the necklace catching on his sleeve when she fell. About pulling away. About dropping the cigarette in the grass without realizing. He wrote about driving. I thought it would disappear by morning. The pages ended there. No signature. No direct confession sentence structured for a courtroom. Just narrative that aligned, almost perfectly, with forensic evidence. The writings were never mailed. They remained in his cell. Until a prison transfer changed everything. During a routine relocation to another facility due to overcrowding, inmates were required to consolidate property. Excess paper was flagged. One officer, aware of the high-profile nature of Michael's case, copied several pages before returning the originals. The copies found their way, through quiet channels, to the warden. From there, to the Georgia Department of Corrections Legal Division. And eventually, to the sheriff's office in Pine Hollow. The sheriff read the pages alone, the same way he had read the earlier letter years before. This time, there was no ambiguity. No hedging. No implication. The description of the necklace catching on his sleeve matched forensic reconstruction. The cigarette dropped unconsciously matched the evidence that had anchored the case for 18 years. The sheriff contacted the Lawson family. They gathered in a small conference room. The pages sat on the table between them. Rebecca's sister read slowly. Line by line. When she reached the sentence, she laughed and looked away like I was nothing. She stopped. That's what this was, she whispered. That's why. No grand motive. No conspiracy. No hidden life. Just wounded pride detonating in darkness. The family faced a decision: make the writings public, or keep them private. Public release would end speculation permanently. It would silence the podcasts, the forums, the doubters. But it would also replay Rebecca's final moments across screens and headlines once more. They chose silence. The pages were archived. Not entered into new court proceedings. Not broadcast. The official record remains the conviction, the DNA, the verdict. But in Pine Hollow, among those closest to the case, there is now clarity. 10 seconds. A laugh, real or perceived. A man who could not tolerate feeling small. And a gun. Michael Carter never formally confessed. In legal terms, he remains a man convicted by evidence, not by admission. But in a prison cell under fluorescent light, in ink pressed hard enough to nearly tear paper, he told the truth he could never say aloud in court. The road on County 16 is quiet tonight. The wind moves through the pines. Drivers pass without knowing that somewhere, in a locked archive drawer in a small Georgia sheriff's office, lies the final missing piece of a story that once consumed a town. The case is solved. The motive is known. And the most chilling realization of all lingers in the still air. It took only 10 seconds for everything to break. The pages were locked away, but secrets have weight. And weight shifts. Even without public release, even without headlines screaming confession, something in Pine Hollow felt different after the sheriff and the Lawson family read Michael Carter's handwritten account. The air no longer buzzed with unanswered questions. It carried something heavier. Understanding. Not forgiveness. Never that. Understanding. Word did not spread through press conferences. It moved the way news always moves in small towns, through careful conversations, through subtle changes in tone, through the way certain phrases stopped being debated. The podcasts stopped revisiting the case. The online forums quieted. The doubters found less traction. Because while the pages remained sealed, the conviction now felt anchored not just in science, but in narrative. The missing Y had shape. Ugly, small, painfully human shape. Rebecca had laughed. Or maybe she hadn't. Maybe she had simply smiled politely and turned away. Maybe she had said she was tired. Maybe she had said nothing at all. But in Michael's mind, in those 10 seconds, something snapped under the pressure of perceived humiliation. That detail, the fragility of ego, cut deeper than any conspiracy ever could. It meant the threat had never been a monster lurking in shadows. It had been proximity. Ordinary resentment. A man who could not bear feeling dismissed. In the years following the quiet discovery of his writings, prison officials reported a subtle change in Michael Carter's behavior. He stopped requesting old newspaper archives. He stopped asking for legal materials. He spent more time in the chapel. Less time in the yard. The stack of handwritten pages did not grow. One afternoon, during a routine counseling session, he reportedly said something that never made it into official records, but traveled through informal channels among staff. "I keep replaying her face," he said. "It's not how I remembered it." Memory, especially guilty memory, shifts. Distorts. Protects. For years, perhaps, he had framed that moment as provocation. As insult. But time has a way of stripping self-defense from recollection. Maybe her expression hadn't been mockery. Maybe it had been confusion. Maybe it had been fear. The Georgia Department of Corrections denied requests for interviews from media outlets still circling the case. There would be no televised confession. No final interview special. The story, publicly, ended at the verdict. Privately, it ended in ink. Back in Pine Hollow, County Road 16 was repaved. The asphalt smoothed over the old gravel shoulder. The shallow ditch was graded clean. There is no marker there now. No cross. No sign. The Lawson family chose not to memorialize the exact location. They wanted Rebecca remembered in life, not in the posture she fell. At the diner, the memorial wall expanded into a scholarship fund. Each year, a graduating senior received the Rebecca Lawson Memorial Award, given not for grades, but for kindness. Because that, her sister insisted, was the point. She made people feel seen, she said during one ceremony. The irony lingers. A woman remembered for making others feel seen was killed by a man who could not tolerate feeling unseen. The town's fear has softened over time, replaced by vigilance. Parents still tell their teenagers not to pull over on empty roads at night. They share the story not as a ghost tale, but as a lesson in boundaries and caution. Trust carefully. Lock your doors. Don't mistake familiarity for safety. The sheriff who reopened the case eventually retired. On his final day, he stood alone in the evidence room one last time. He opened the file marked Lawson, Rebecca, 2004. Inside, photographs, lab reports, court transcripts, and a sealed envelope containing copies of Michael's handwritten pages. He didn't reread them. He didn't need to. He knew how the story ended. Not with the gunshot. Not with the verdict. But with 10 seconds. 10 seconds that transformed a restless drive into a life sentence. 10 seconds that reshaped a town's sense of security. 10 seconds that would echo longer than the sound of the shot itself. As the sheriff turned off the lights and closed the door, Pine Hollow moved into another quiet evening. Porch lights flickered on. Crickets began their steady rhythm. A truck rolled down County Road 16, headlights sweeping across trees that have witnessed more than they will ever reveal. The case is no longer a mystery. It is no longer debated. It lives now as history. But history, especially violent history, does not vanish. It settles into foundations. It hums beneath routine. And somewhere behind reinforced walls and steel bars, a man lies awake some nights replaying a memory that refuses to soften. A woman in a car. A window lowered just slightly. A sentence, real or imagined. A flicker of pride collapsing. A gun lifting. 10 seconds. Outside, the world keeps moving. Inside, time stretches differently. Rebecca Lawson will always be 26 in memory. Always stepping out of the diner into cool Georgia air. Always expecting to see the morning. Michael Carter will age behind bars, his hair whitening, his hands trembling, carrying the weight of a moment he can never undo. The headline declared it solved. Science closed the file. Justice imposed a sentence. But the true horror of County Road 16 is simpler, quieter, more unsettling than any mystery. It was never about darkness in the woods. It was about darkness in a man who could not stand being laughed at. And that kind of darkness does not announce itself. It rides beside you. It flashes headlights. It waits for 10 seconds. Then it changes everything. Some cases end with a verdict. Others end with a name. But a few, rare, unsettling, unforgettable, end with a mirror. Years after the Lawson case was closed, a criminology professor at the University of Georgia began using it in lectures. Not for the forensics. Not for the DNA breakthrough. For the psychology. He would dim the lights in the auditorium and present a simple question to his students. What does it take to become the worst moment of your own life? The room would stay silent. Because the Lawson case did not hinge on decades of violence, criminal masterminds, or elaborate planning. It hinged on perceived humiliation. On wounded pride. On a story someone told themselves in the span of seconds. The professor would then display a timeline. 10:42 p.m., Rebecca leaves the diner. 10:47 p.m., Michael drives past her vehicle. 10:48 p.m. Gunshot reported by distant homeowner. 60 seconds. An entire future erased inside 1 minute. For the students, it was disturbing. For Pine Hollow, it was personal. In the years following the conviction, the town changed in subtle ways that outsiders might never notice. The annual Fall Festival, once held along the dim stretch near County Road 16, was relocated closer to Main Street. Patrol routes were quietly adjusted. Streetlights were installed along previously dark segments of road. No official report linked those changes to Rebecca. But everyone knew. The Lawson family, meanwhile, navigated grief in phases. Anger came first. Then relief. Then a strange, hollow quiet. Rebecca's mother once told a local reporter, off the record, that the confession pages had hurt more than the trial. The trial was about evidence, she said. The pages were about her final seconds. It is one thing to know who did it. It is another to read how they justified it. Michael Carter never appealed beyond the standard motions. His attorneys, after reviewing the evidence and the confession, quietly stepped back. There would be no sensational retrial. No dramatic twist. In prison, he became unremarkable. That may be the most unsettling detail of all. Guards described him as polite. Reserved. A man who kept to himself. He enrolled in anger management classes. Completed vocational training. Wrote letters to no one. The monster people imagined did not materialize. Instead, there was a man, aging, quieter each year, who once made a catastrophic decision. And that reality is harder to process than a caricature of evil. Because if evil looks ordinary, then it hides more easily. True crime podcasts occasionally revisit the case, usually framing it as a triumph of modern forensics. Genetic genealogy. Persistence. The slow grind of science outpacing time. But the locals do not talk about DNA. They talk about that night. About how close danger had been. How familiar the face behind it turned out to be. How easily trust can be misplaced. Rebecca's scholarship fund continues. Each year, the recipient stands at the podium and speaks briefly about kindness, about community, about looking out for one another. It is both tribute and warning. Years later, a new generation drives County Road 16 without knowing every detail. They know only that something happened once. Something bad. Their parents mention it in fragments. That's where. And then the sentence trails off. The landscape has healed. Grass grows thick along the shoulder. The trees stand indifferent. If you didn't know, you would never guess a life ended there. But memory is not visible from the road. It lives in houses. In quiet kitchens. In the way Rebecca's sister still pauses, when she hears unexpected laughter behind her in public spaces, just for a second. 10 seconds. That number never stopped echoing. Because the Lawson case forced a community to confront something deeply uncomfortable. Not every tragedy is the result of elaborate evil. Sometimes it is the result of unchecked ego. Unexamined anger. A story invented inside someone's head, and believed completely. Michael Carter once wrote in his final page, "I thought I was proving something." That line haunted investigators long after the ink dried. Proving what? Strength. Respect. Control. All he proved was how fragile his pride truly was. In Pine Hollow, the case is no longer debated. It is studied. It is remembered. And in quiet conversations between parents and children, between professors and students, between officers and recruits, one lesson rises above the rest. Moments matter. Reactions matter. The stories we tell ourselves in anger can become irreversible reality. The file is closed. The sentence stands. The road is quiet. But somewhere, in classrooms and living rooms and patrol cars, the Lawson case continues to speak. Not in headlines. Not in breaking news alerts. But in a quieter warning. You never know which 10 seconds will define you. And once they do, there is no going back. Time did what it always does. It moved forward. Children who were in elementary school when Rebecca Lawson was killed are now adults with families of their own. The diner has new owners. The old sheriff's office has been renovated. Paint covers the walls that once held missing person flyers. But some stories don't fade. They settle. They become reference points in a town's identity. In Pine Hollow, people speak of time in two eras, before Rebecca and after Rebecca. Before, doors were left unlocked. After, they weren't. Before, a stalled car on a dark road meant a neighbor in need. After, it meant hesitation. Before, familiarity felt like safety. After, it felt conditional. The case reshaped instincts. Years after the conviction, a documentary crew reached out to the Lawson family, hoping to produce a streaming special titled 10 Seconds on County Road 16. They promised careful storytelling, cinematic recreations, national exposure. The family declined. "We don't want her last minute to be entertainment," Rebecca's father said in a brief statement. And that was that. No dramatic reenactments. No slow-motion headlights cutting through artificial fog. Because the real horror had already happened, quietly, without soundtrack. Michael Carter turned 60 inside a concrete cell. Prison records note no major disciplinary infractions. He works in the library now, shelving books, scanning barcodes, organizing other people's stories. There is something almost unbearable in that detail. A man who rewrote reality in his head for 10 seconds now categorizes fiction and non-fiction for a living. In a rare internal psychological review, a counselor summarized him in a single line. Subject demonstrates late-stage cognitive acceptance of responsibility, without expectation of absolution. Acceptance without absolution. That may be the truest ending the case will ever receive. Because closure is a word outsiders use. For the Lawson family, there is no clean line separating past from present. There are only anniversaries. Birthdays marked quietly. The space at Thanksgiving that never filled again. Rebecca's mother still keeps her daughter's voicemail greeting saved on an old phone. "Hey, it's Rebecca, leave me something good." The recording is cheerful. Unaware. Frozen in a world where the future still exists. Meanwhile, County Road 16 continues its indifferent stretch across Georgia soil. Trucks pass. Teenagers speed. Couples argue. Radios play late-night talk shows. Life overlays tragedy. But if you stop your car along that road at night, engine off, headlights dark, you will hear nothing unusual. Just wind. Just insects. Just the ordinary rhythm of the world continuing. And that ordinariness is what makes the story endure. Because there was no mastermind's lair. No hidden criminal empire. No dramatic chase. Just two vehicles. Two lives intersecting briefly. One ego cracking. One trigger pulled. 10 seconds. Investigators who worked the case have mostly retired. Some still receive occasional emails from aspiring detectives, asking what it felt like to finally solve it. They all answer the same way. It felt necessary. Not triumphant. Not victorious. Necessary. Because justice, in its purest form, is not spectacle. It is correction. It is balance restored as much as possible. It is a name attached to an act, so the victim is not left carrying the mystery alone. Rebecca Lawson is no longer the girl on the dark road. She is a sister, a daughter, a scholarship, a memory spoken gently at family gatherings. Michael Carter is no longer an unknown suspect in an unsolved file. He is an inmate number, a conviction, a cautionary study in fragile pride. The headline years ago declared it solved. And it was. But the real ending was quieter than the news cycle ever captured. It lives in habits changed, in instincts sharpened, in conversations parents have with teenagers before handing over car keys. It lives in classrooms where professors ask uncomfortable questions about anger and perception. It lives in a prison library where a man shelves books beneath fluorescent lights, understanding too late the difference between imagined insult and irreversible action. 10 seconds changed 2 families forever. 10 seconds reshaped a town. 10 seconds became a lesson that outlived the trial, the verdict, the media coverage. And somewhere, in the stillness of another Georgia night, headlights sweep across County Road 16 again. This time, nothing happens. The cars pass. The moment dissolves harmlessly into darkness. Because most moments do. But Pine Hollow will never forget that one moment that didn't. The case is closed. The road is quiet. The warning remains. Cold cases are often remembered for the mystery. This one is remembered for the mirror it held up. Years have now passed since the Lawson file was stamped closed in thick black ink. The paper has yellowed slightly at the edges. The evidence room shelf where it once sat now holds newer cases, fresher tragedies, different names. But Rebecca Lawson's case still circulates, not through sirens or breaking news alerts, but through quiet training seminars for young deputies. When recruits gather for their first session on unsolved investigations, a senior officer places a thin binder on the desk. Persistence, he says. This is what it looks like. Inside that binder, timelines, overlooked details, technological advancements that didn't exist in 2004. DNA techniques refined. Databases expanded. A reminder that time can be an ally if you refuse to let it become an excuse. The Lawson case is taught not as a spectacle, but as proof that truth can outlast silence. In Pine Hollow, Rebecca's name has softened into legacy. The scholarship fund has helped dozens of students leave town for college, some studying criminal justice, some psychology, some simply chasing futures Rebecca never got to have. At the annual ceremony last year, one recipient said something that lingered long after the applause faded. She didn't get more time, the student said. So we have to use ours well. It was simple, honest, and devastating. Michael Carter's world, meanwhile, has narrowed to routine. Wake-up bell. Breakfast tray. Library shift. Evening count. Lights out. Years behind bars have etched lines into his face. The man who once reacted in seconds now measures life in decades. There are no more statements from him. No more pages written. Just time. Time to replay. Time to reconsider. Time to understand that whatever he believed in that moment, whatever story he constructed about disrespect or humiliation, was fiction he authored himself. And the cost of that fiction was permanent. The Lawson family no longer reads updates from the Department of Corrections. They chose peace over monitoring his existence. For them, Justice was not about watching him age. It was about reclaiming their daughter's name from the word unsolved. That word is gone now. Replaced by something steadier. Solved. Convicted. Accountable. Yet the deeper truth of County Road 16 remains more unsettling than any mystery ever was. Because nothing about that night required elaborate planning. Nothing required a criminal mastermind. It required only a flash of anger. An unchecked narrative. 10 seconds of ego overpowering reason. That is why the story endures. It forces an uncomfortable recognition. The line between ordinary and irreversible can be terrifyingly thin. Today, if you drive through Pine Hollow, you will find no crime scene tape. No news vans. No whispers on every corner. You will find a town that survived. A community that adapted. A family that carries grief with dignity instead of spectacle. And a stretch of road that looks like any other. But somewhere in the collective memory of that place, there is still a quiet understanding. Moments matter. Choices matter. Stories we invent in anger can become sentences we serve for life. The headlines have faded. The cameras moved on. The world continued turning. But Rebecca Lawson remains 26 in the minds of those who loved her. And Michael Carter remains a man defined not by years, but by 10 seconds. Cold cases are often about patience. This one was about perception. About how quickly pride can mutate into violence. About how science can catch up to truth, even if it takes years. And about how justice, when it finally arrives, is rarely loud. It is steady. It is necessary. It closes the file. And then it leaves behind a lesson that whispers long after the story ends. On County Road 16, headlights still pass in the dark. Most of them carry people home safely. Most of them dissolve into nothing. But Pine Hollow will always remember the night one pair didn't. And that memory, quiet, enduring, unshakable, is the final chapter. Every town has a story it doesn't advertise. Not because it's forgotten, but because it's understood. In Pine Hollow, the Lawson case no longer lives in active conversation. It lives in instinct. In the way neighbors check in more often. In the way patrol cars idle a little longer on dark stretches of road. In the way laughter, once carefree, sometimes carries a second glance over the shoulder. Not paranoia. Awareness. That is what the case ultimately left behind. Awareness that danger does not always arrive masked. Awareness that anger, if left unquestioned, can metastasize in seconds. Awareness that the stories we tell ourselves about other people, about disrespect, rejection, humiliation, are not facts. They are interpretations. And interpretations can kill. In training seminars, instructors now use a single slide when referencing County Road 16. It contains no graphic images. No dramatic language. Just 3 lines. Perception. Reaction. Consequence. Underneath, in smaller text. 10 seconds is enough. The science that solved Rebecca's case was extraordinary. Advances in forensic genealogy gave investigators tools they never had in 2004. A trace sample, preserved carefully, waited for the world to catch up to it. And it did. That is the hopeful part of this story. Truth can wait. Justice can endure delays. Technology can bridge years. But what technology cannot undo is a moment already lived. That remains the irreversible core. Michael Carter will likely spend the remainder of his life inside concrete walls. Not because he was a criminal mastermind, Not because he orchestrated a grand scheme, but because he allowed a fleeting narrative, one he invented, to override restraint. When psychologists later reviewed his writings, one phrase stood out. I felt small. Small. It is astonishing how much destruction can grow from that feeling. Rebecca Lawson never knew she was participating in someone else's internal battle. She never knew her expression, whatever it truly was, would be misread, magnified, weaponized. She was simply driving home. Simply living. Simply expecting tomorrow. And that is what makes the story echo. Because there was no warning sign. No escalating feud. No public threat. Just a fragile ego meeting an ordinary moment, and collapsing under its own insecurity. Years from now, new officers will retire. New families will move to Pine Hollow. The scholarship fund may continue under different organizers. The diner may change names again. But County Road 16 will remain. A quiet stretch of asphalt beneath open sky. Cars will pass. Conversations will unfold inside them. Some drivers will be angry. Some distracted. Some wounded in ways invisible to the world. And most of them will choose restraint. Most of them will let the moment pass. That is the invisible victory this case now represents. Not the arrest. Not the conviction. But the reminder that you are always one reaction away from defining yourself. One unchecked story away from catastrophe. One decision away from permanence. Cold cases are often remembered for suspense. This one should be remembered for responsibility. Because in the end, the most chilling truth of Pine Hollow was not hidden DNA or forensic delay. It was how ordinary the catalyst was. How human. How preventable. Rebecca Lawson's name is no longer followed by the word unsolved. It is followed by memory. By legacy. By lessons carried quietly through generations. Michael Carter's name is no longer a mystery. It is a caution. And County Road 16. It remains what it always was. A road. Silent. Unremarkable. Waiting for the next pair of headlights to pass harmlessly into the dark. The file is closed. The sentence stands. The lesson endures. 10 seconds can change everything. And sometimes, the most powerful ending isn't justice delivered. It's awareness carried forward. When a case truly ends, there is no music. No closing narration. No final shot fading to black. There is only silence. Not the dramatic kind. Just the ordinary, everyday quiet of a world that keeps going. Years after the final appeal window closed, the Lawson case exists mostly in archives, digital records, sealed transcripts, preserved evidence. New detectives scrolling through old databases sometimes pause on the file, reading summaries of a crime that once consumed an entire department. To them, it is history. To Pine Hollow, it is memory. There's a difference. History is studied. Memory is felt. On the 20th anniversary of Rebecca's death, the town did not hold a large public vigil. There were no news crews. No speeches amplified through speakers. Instead, the Lawson family gathered privately at a small park bench dedicated in her name, moved there quietly years earlier, away from the road itself. They didn't talk about the trial. They didn't mention Michael Carter. They talked about Rebecca's laugh. About how she always ordered extra pickles. About how she once drove 2 hours, just to surprise her sister on a bad day. That is how victims survive beyond headlines. Not through the violence done to them, but through the ordinary details that made them human. Meanwhile, inside prison walls, time has narrowed further. Michael Carter walks slower now. His hair has thinned to gray. The sharpness of his younger face has softened into age. He has become what all long-term inmates eventually become. A man defined by a single decision. Not every night is sleepless. Not every thought is regret. But the awareness remains. 10 seconds. In psychological assessments conducted over the years, one consistent observation appears. Carter demonstrates sustained remorse without self-exoneration. He no longer references disrespect. No longer frames the moment as provocation. He refers to it simply as the choice. The choice. It sounds small. Almost harmless. But that word contains everything. Because that is what the Lawson case ultimately distilled itself down to, not mystery, not forensic innovation, not dramatic courtroom tension. A choice. A reaction. A trigger pulled instead of lowered. In Pine Hollow, parents still tell their teenagers a version of the story when they first start driving at night. They don't dramatize it. They simplify it. If someone makes you angry, they say, let it go. That advice carries more weight than it once did. Over time, the town's identity reshaped itself not around fear, but around restraint. Around second chances in moments that might otherwise escalate. Arguments at the diner cool faster now. Disputes at town meetings end earlier. It is impossible to prove direct causation. But the influence lingers. Because when a community confronts how fragile the line between normal and irreversible can be, it learns to step back from that line. Rebecca Lawson remains 26 in memory. She never aged into middle life. Never saw the technological breakthroughs that ultimately solved her case. Never witnessed the quiet ripple effect her story would have. But her name now stands for something steadier than tragedy. It stands for patience in investigation. For progress in science. For accountability that arrived, even if delayed. And for a lesson that transcends Pine Hollow entirely. Moments test us. Often without warning. Often when we are already tired, already frustrated, already nursing invisible wounds. Most of those moments pass unnoticed. But some become permanent. The Lawson case is no longer a breaking news banner. It is not trending. It is not debated. It is a settled truth. And perhaps that is the final mercy in all of this. Not erasure. But stillness. County Road 16 stretches on beneath Georgia sky, unchanged in shape, altered forever in meaning. Headlights sweep across it each night. Engines hum. People drive home. And somewhere, in the quiet space between impulse and action, there exists a pause. A breath. A chance to choose differently. That pause is invisible. But it is powerful. Because 10 seconds once changed everything. And now. In the silence after the story. That same 10 seconds serves as a warning. Not shouted. Not sensationalized. Just understood. In the end, what remains is not the crime scene. Not the evidence. Not even the verdict. What remains is the imprint. Every case leaves one. Some leave fear. Some leave anger. Some leave division. The Lawson case left something quieter. Restraint. If you ask the younger officers now, those who were still in high school when the arrest was finally made, they don't describe the case as shocking. They describe it as sobering. Because it dismantled the myth that evil always looks extreme. It showed instead how quickly ordinary emotions can mutate when unchecked. Anger, embarrassment, pride. Each one human. Each one common. Each one capable of becoming catastrophic in the wrong second. Rebecca Lawson's name is now etched into a small bronze plaque beneath that park bench. The metal warms in summer, cools in winter, gathers rain, gathers dust. People sit there without always knowing the full story. Children climb onto it. Couples rest. Elderly neighbors pause during morning walks. Life continues around her name. That may be the most honest tribute of all. Not frozen tragedy, but continuity. Michael Carter will likely never walk County Road 16 again. His world has narrowed to measured steps, scheduled movements, institutional time. In one of his final psychological reviews before eligibility for a routine hearing assessment, he reportedly said, "If I had waited 10 seconds, none of this would exist." It was not a plea. Not an excuse. Just recognition. And recognition, though late, is still truth. For investigators, the case became proof that no file is ever truly dormant. Evidence can sleep. Technology can evolve. Leads can resurface when patience meets progress. But for the town, the lesson was never primarily about science. It was about self-control. About the invisible power of stepping back. There is something haunting in knowing that nothing mechanical failed that night. No gun malfunction. No car crash. No unavoidable accident. Just a human decision made in a narrow window of time. And that truth lingers more heavily than mystery ever could. Because mystery feels distant. Choice feels personal. Years from now, when Pine Hollow is larger, busier, perhaps less rural than it once was, County Road the 16th of may be widened. Repaved again. Lined with brighter lights. New residents may not know the name Rebecca Lawson immediately. But the town will still carry the imprint. In its caution. In its awareness. In the quiet understanding that anger must be questioned before it is acted upon. The Lawson family no longer measures time by court dates or parole eligibility. They measure it by milestones Rebecca missed. Birthdays that would have been. Careers she might have built. Children she might have held. Grief evolves, but it does not vanish. It softens around the edges. Becomes less jagged. But it stays. And yet, alongside grief, something else endures. Meaning. Because her story became more than a solved case. It became a cautionary thread woven into everyday life. 10 seconds. That phrase no longer sounds abstract in Pine Hollow. It sounds tangible. Real. A space wide enough to breathe. Wide enough to choose. Wide enough to stop. In the final analysis, the Lawson case is not remembered for spectacle. It is remembered for clarity. For stripping away the illusion that tragedy requires complexity. Sometimes it requires only impulse. An impulse, left unchallenged, is powerful. Rebecca Lawson remains 26 in memory. Michael Carter remains a man defined by one irreversible reaction. County Road 16 remains quiet. And the rest of the world continues to spin. But beneath the ordinary rhythm of passing headlights and fading sunsets, one truth endures. The space between feeling and action is small. Guard it. Because once it collapses, everything changes.